Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're well. I hope everything is going okay during these difficult times. I won't be talking about that just because I want this video to be exciting and happy, but I hope everything is going well. Thank you for joining me today. This video is going to be a beast of videos. It's going to be my biggest ever video so far, but I wanted to make it very detailed so that it's good for any beginners or anybody who's already doing it but isn't sure kind of whether they're going the right way or if they want to improve anything, things like that. So today I'll be talking about full coverage cross stitch pieces. How do you start? Where do you start? What do you need to do it? It's good for beginners, so if you haven't stitched before or maybe you're kind of just starting to dip into stitching, this will be a good starter for you. If you're kind of unsure of where to start with full coverage, this should be helpful. And if you've got any comments, please leave them down below. Any questions, anything like that, I'll try my best to answer them. And yeah, if I look to the side, that's only because I've got my iPad on the side with everything written down, so I want to be organised for this video. There might be quite a few cut-offs and things like that, but let's jump into it and I hope you will enjoy it. Okay, so first things first, I would recommend deciding what kind of pattern you would like. So there are a couple of things you need to consider when looking at different patterns. So number one, you would probably decide whether you're going for a PDF pattern or you want a printed copy. You would want a PDF pattern if you're using any apps on your tablet. That could be a Pattern Keeper, it could be a Saga cross stitch, or you would prefer highlighting everything by hand. Now, from my personal experience, for full coverage pieces, PDF is always better because you can enlarge it, you can make all the symbols larger, the squares larger. You can obviously use Pattern Keeper, which is a lifesaver. I will do a little demo and then insert it here and show you both Saga and I'll show you Pattern Keeper so you could see the difference between them and what you can kind of do, just to give you a brief idea, and I'll probably insert that here. Okay, so I've promised I will do a couple of quick videos in terms of the apps I use. So this is the Pattern Keeper, which is the most popular app for full coverage pieces. So you can upload all of them into here. And what I'm going to show you is basically how you would use it. So it gives you a good overview of your pages, the breakdown, what you've got. It gives you a good overview of what you have already done. So what you would do, you can enlarge this, obviously, get it so much closer and see all of the symbols. But the advantage of the Pattern Keeper is that you can pick a color, let's say this one, and it will be highlighted in green where you need to stitch, as you can see. So if I zoom that in, it will show you exactly where your stitches are, so you can just pick one color and stitch it within the page, which is what I do, and it's just such a time saver. It also tells you on the side here all the statistics, so how many stitches you've stitched today. It shows you how many stitches you have stitched out of the entire piece, how many stitches are there in the piece, and percentage wise how much have you stitched already. So I really like this app. It makes life so much easier, and it makes it happen quicker. So that's one of the apps, and another app is called Saga Cross Stitch, which I'll show you in a second. Okay, so this is Cross Stitch Saga, which is a different app. Now with Pattern Keeper, you would use PDFs. With this, you would use XSD files. Now a lot of Etsy shops can provide, a lot of designers provide XSD files for you. Let's open it up. It's very similar. It's the same system, you know, you can pick the color that you want, it will highlight it. It's just different files really. It gives you again you know, the number of stitches in each colour. You can pick whichever colour you want to do. It's as easy as the pattern keeper, and it's exactly the same, as just for different files. So if you have XSD file, you can use it with this program here. So I have both, and I alternate use them as I go along, depending on what I have really. So once kind of you decided, weighted pros and cons of both the actual printed copy and the PDF copy, you need to decide, you know, what stitch count you want to do, so how big your piece is going to be. Now, anything probably, at least for me, anything that's over 200 stitches wide and, you know, long, to me that's quite a big piece. So it's absolutely up to you. What I would recommend doing is going to one of the websites, and I'll put a link down here and in the description box, where in that link you can type in the stitches. So let's say it's 125 by 125. You can type that in the website and put in your fabric count, and it will give you the finished size of the piece. So that's quite important. You would consider the stitch count in terms of how many stitches there are per piece and whether that's doable for you in your lifetime or not. And then you would consider the size of the actual finished piece, whether that's big enough, whether that's too big for your home. You know, you might think that it will be too expensive to frame it if it's too big. So you would kind of think about those things. Now, as an example, I'll probably show you the pieces that I have going on at the moment. Let's have a look. So I'm just opening up my pattern keeper again, and I'll show you the patterns that I do have. So this is my pattern keeper, and I do have quite a few patterns going on over here. So my largest piece is Love is in the Air by Josephine Wall, charted by Heaven and Earth Designs, and you can see how many pages there are. So that's quite a big pattern. And then in comparison, so let's have a look. This pattern here, this pattern here is 500 stitches by 675, so it's quite a big pattern. Now this one I'm going to show you, this is Mini Absinthe, again Heaven and Earth Designs. So this is the mock-up, and the size of this one is 325 by 325. And then you can definitely see the difference in the number of pages. Woo! Just dropped my tablet. So you can definitely see the number of pages and stitches. The tablet is okay, by the way. Different, you know, sizing and things like that. So that's something you would consider, the stitch count, whether that's doable for you, and the finished size of the piece. Now, in terms of the stitch count, what I tend to do, I tend to have a look at the entire piece and see how many stitches there are. So let's say 30,000 stitches. Then I know how long it takes me to do 100 stitches. It takes me about an hour or 45 minutes, depending on the stitches. So let's say it takes me an hour for 100 stitches. So I would divide the total amount of stitches per piece divided by 100 stitches, and I would know exactly how many hours it would take me to do that one piece. So you could work it out that way as well, see how many hours it will take you. Do you want to dedicate that many hours per that specific piece? I think that's quite a nice way of going about that. So that's one of those things. Now, in terms of purchasing different pieces, I'm just trying to open up my iPad to have a look at the next section. There are so many retailers, so many shops that do PDFs. So one of them is Heaven and Earth Designs. That's one of the most popular full coverage designers, charters. You have Tilton Crafts, you've got Charting Creations. There's so many. You can buy, kits that are already pre-made. So the world is your oyster, basically. There's so many options. So that was all about the patterns. Number 2, it's buying kits or kitting everything yourself. So you may have heard of certain makers such as Dimensions. Dimensions kits are all ready to go. So it will have a fabric, it will have floss, it will have the pattern, it even has needles, it has everything you need to start going with it. So you don't need to do anything. You just pay what you pay and you get everything you need. Now, you could also go the other way and purchase a pattern, which we've just discussed, and kit everything yourself. That means you will have to buy the floss, the fabric, any beads if it requires beads and things like that. The advantages of full coverage pieces when you have to kit it up yourself is that you can do it little by little, so kit up as you go along, because they do get quite expensive. So you can purchase, 20 flosses one month, 20 flosses next month, or you can stitch only one colour until it runs out and then buy another colour. So that's the advantages, really, that you can control when you put in the money. But if you get a kit, you have everything all at once and you're ready to go. So it really depends on your circumstances. Number 3, you would need to think about different types of fabric that are available for full coverage pieces. Now I'm going to show you different types. So there are 3 different fabrics. You can use Aida, which is, it already has quite big holes and it's quite easy to stitch on it, especially for full coverage pieces. Then you've got Even Weave, which is, as it says, it's even weave fabric. Or you can have linen. Now linen, out of all of these 3, will be the most expensive fabric, so it's absolutely up to you. In my opinion, linen creates the most flawless and even crosses because you control the tension. Once you pull the thread out and pull it out again, you control how the threads kind of contract and that kind of thing, whereas with Even Weave and Aida you can't do that. So I do prefer linen, but probably not for full coverage pieces. For full coverage pieces I do prefer Even Weave. So just to show you what I'm talking about, I have a piece of Aida. So this is Aida. So as you can see, it's quite obvious where the holes are, and I might open this up so you can see it even better. So the holes are quite big, it's quite obvious what your cross needs to go, and it's quite easy to use. Now I personally don't like working with Aida, just mainly because of when I pull the thread, the sound of it is just, it's a constant squeaky sound, and to me that's just, I can't do it. The next example I'll give you is of Even Weave. So this is a scrap of Even Weave. As you can see, it's definitely different in comparison to Aida. This is my favorite fabric to go off for full coverage pieces. Here we are. It's quite see-through. So that's Even Weave. Let me just see if I've got linen. And this is a piece of linen. Here we are. So one of the things, obviously with linen, some strands are thicker like here and some are thinner, but as I mentioned, you can control how neat the stitches are very easily. It's all about the tension. With linen you can control it very well, but I would not recommend it for full coverage pieces, mainly because linen is expensive. You would need a lot of it, and I just think even weave is as good as you need it to be. Now there are a few other things to consider about these 3 different types of fabric. It's their count. So there are different counts of fabric that are available to you. So they start from count 14 and go all the way up to 50 and upwards. The most common ones to use, so for Aida, that would be 14, 16, 18, 20 and 22. If I work with Aida, which is quite rare, but if I do it, I normally use 18 count Aida for full coverage pieces, and I'll show you an example. So this is a full coverage piece on 18 count Aida. So for me, I can still see this without a magnifying glass, and it's delicate enough, the holes are small enough for the piece to look, again, delicate, and for the piece to look kind of very detailed. I think if I go any lower, if I go with count 16, for example, for full coverage piece, to me that's a little bit too big. The cross is a bit too big for my liking. But give it a go, see what works best. I might do another video comparing different counts on different fabrics, just so you could see the difference between all of those. So that's different counts for Aida. As of even weave and linen, you can get, again, different counts. So you can go with 28, 32, 36. You can go 40, 50. You could go 25. Now, it's up to you what you do, but I prefer using 25 count even weave for my full coverage pieces. 28 count is just too big. 28 count in even weave equals 14 count in Aida. So there's just, the crosses are way too big for full coverage piece. Your piece will end up being massive. To me it's too big, but I know some ladies and some gentlemen who stitch full coverage pieces on 14 count Aida or 28 count even weave, and they're absolutely happy with it. They can see it well enough and it looks gorgeous. So it's personal preference, but for me, I don't use 28 count or 14 count. Now 32 count, I wouldn't probably use either. Again, 32 count in even weave equals 16 count in Aida. To me, again, that's still a little bit too big. As of anything else, so 38, 40 count, I don't particularly do that, again, for full coverage pieces. The most popular count for full coverage pieces within the stitching community is count 25, and I will show you as an example one of my projects, which is on 25 count even weave, and I stitch one thread over one thread, again, one thread of floss over one count. So this is 25 count even weave, and the actual stitching. So you can see how delicate it is and how detailed it is. It's very, very, very detailed. Now with 25 count 25, you would stitch over one fabric thread. Okay, so you wouldn't do a cross stitch over two, you would do it over one. I will do a little demo later. Kind of what you could expect with even weave. As of linen, again, I wouldn't use it for full coverage pieces, but if you want to, you can kind of experiment with different counts. The higher the count, the more delicate and detailed your piece will look. But the most popular one is this one. If you join any groups, if you follow any cross stitches, you will see that if they do full coverage piece, they'll normally use 25 count, or they will use 28 count but stitch not over 2 threads but over 1. So 28 count is even kind of tiny. It's really, really tiny. So that's in terms of fabric. Now the next thing you need to consider is whether you would like to purchase a blank piece of fabric like this or pre-gridded fabric. Okay, so you can buy this fabric like this, and it already comes pre-gridded, which makes life so much easier. You can see where you're stitching, you can count easier, it just helps. If you buying a blank canvas like this fabric, you can still grid it yourself, and I'm going to show you what I use. So I use this pen here, so you can see exactly what it is. So this is water erasable pen, medium tip. So this is washable. What I do, I just mark my squares on my stitching. So like I did over here, you can see I have done it over here. And then once you finish with the full piece, you would put it in water, a little bit soap, and it will dilute, the whole pen marks would come out. So there's different options. Obviously this is easy and quicker, but what I still tend to do, and this is a very good tip for you, I still tend to mark. So if I get pre-gridded fabric like this, I still tend to grid it with my pen on top of this. Now the main reason being, when I stitch over this, I stop seeing where the grid lines are. You can't see them through your stitches. So I get lost. I start stitching once I've got a lot of stitches done and I have only a couple of them missing. It's very difficult to see which square it is, where they are, because you can't see these pre-gridded lines through your stitches. But if you mark it with this on top of this pen, you can still see it through your stitches. So even if you stitch the piece, you can still tell where the square is. So that's what I tend to do, at least, or try to do with as many pieces as I can, because it makes life so much easier and it's a very good tip. I wish somebody had said that to me when I started. So let's have a look. I'm just looking at my iPad to have a look what's next. So you have chosen your pattern, you've chosen PDF or hard copy. You have decided, you know, how big the pattern you want it to be, how many stitches you want it to have. You've considered the finished size of the piece. You have picked your fabric, Aida, even weave or linen. You have picked your count for the fabric. You would need to calculate the size of the fabric, okay? To calculate the size of the fabric, again, you would need to go to the same website I mentioned earlier, which I believe is Yarn Tree website. Now that we have calculated the size of the fabric you need, you can go ahead and order it. Once that arrives, obviously the next step is your threads. Now for threads, there are so many different ways of storing your threads, organizing your threads, and everybody's got different ways of doing it. I will show you different ways and I'll tell you which one is my favorite and why. Okay, so one of very popular ways is using bobbins and bobbinating skeins of floss, which I have done for one of my full coverage pieces. For my Totoro, if you follow me, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. and I just keep them in this box here. So that's one of the ways. So you would have the entire skein sort of wrapped up around a bobbin, and you would write down the number of it on the side. Okay, so that's one of the ways. Now this is not my favorite way, and I don't do that anymore. I don't really like doing this. It's a bit of a faff, and I'll go into that in a second. You can get these bobbins on Amazon, eBay, Hobbycraft. I would recommend getting them off of eBay because anywhere else is going to be expensive. eBay is super cheap and you can get many. The next option is having floss cards like this. This is something I do a lot because it's quite cheap. So these cards you can get, I believe, something like 20-25 on Amazon for £7-8. Again, I'll post all the links down in the description box, so please do go ahead, have a look, click on the links if you want to purchase them. But these are just simple card pieces, and you would cut your threads and put them on the card. So you would unwind your skein, cut it. What I normally do, I take a skein, wrap it around my arm and cut it, wrap it, cut it. So it's always the same length, and that's the length that works for me. So this is where they are, and then I number them, and I would put the symbol on them because you don't want to look at the pattern, have a symbol. Then you don't want to take that symbol, look at a piece of paper to see which DMC number that symbol is. Then having to go and find the thread is just too much hassle. But if you put symbols on here, you have a pattern, you see the symbol, and you can just match the symbol to what's on your floss card. So much easier, very quick. And the good thing about these is that it doesn't take too much space. So that's one of the ways. And then another way is having organisers. They are called Paco organisers, and they look like this. Let me just unwind it all. They look like this. What I tend to do, I tend to put all the floss in braids just to kind of make it easier for myself. And then the inserts, I didn't have a printer at that point, so I drew all the symbols myself. These organisers are great because it's 100 flosses per organisers. No, what am I saying? Is it 100? No, it's 50 flosses per organiser. So 25 and 25, I believe. You can get them in different sizes. You can get them smaller, like half the size or this size. These are great for full coverage pieces, especially heaven and earth designs. It's very easy to use. The only thing is it does take quite a bit of space. But what I do, I just wrap carefully all the threads, and I put organisers in the plastic little bag or wallet, so I know it's only for that specific project. So I'll show you in a second. So this is for my Love is in the Air, all in one big plastic bag. Now, my favourite ways of doing it, I don't like bobbinating, mainly because it takes so much time. So you will bobbinate everything, then you need a piece of floss, so you unbobbinate everything, cut the length, get 2 strings out, then that leftover piece you bobbinate again, and every time you have to do that, and it's just too much of a faff, and you have to take in and out those bobbins. It's just, I can't really deal with it. Having floss cards is, I love it because it doesn't take up too much space, and I can put these in my project bags. So I can put the entire full coverage piece flosses into a project bag, and it still fits. It doesn't take up too much space. And I do like packer organisers, because it's very easy to take the strings out when I need them, but it does take quite a bit of space and they are expensive. Those packer organisers are like £50 per each. You can get cheap knockoffs, obviously, but you don't want to do that. I suppose you would want to go for the best option available. So packer organisers are the best, and I would not recommend going for anything cheaper, because anything that's cheaper or a different kind, the foam that keeps your threads together isn't tight enough normally, so your threads get loose, and the plastic is really cheap, so it just breaks. The clips break. It's just not the best. So pack organisers, they are amazing, and that's the original piece that you would want to get. But when you're starting out, I would just say go for the cards, because they're cheap, and they do the same job basically. So why wouldn't you, isn't it? So that's different ways of keeping your flosses. Now in terms of flosses, if you're kind of just starting stitching, you will probably heard of DMC threads, anchor threads. DMC threads are the most popular for full cross, for full coverage pieces. So the next, what have we got next? Okay, so next we've got hoops and QSnaps and scroll frames. So to keep your stitching tight, you can use hoops. So this is one of the hoops that I own. This is actually the only hoop that I own. I don't really do hoops. I did work with hoops when I started, and then I didn't particularly like it, because especially wooden hoops would leave marks on my stitching. And what I've done, I've wrapped it in a ribbon, but it still wasn't good enough. Like, it still left marks. I know a lot of floss tubers use plastic hoops, and I've not seen them having any issues with those, so you might give it a go. But normally what you do, you just tighten it up at the top here, and you have your stitching in here. I prefer using QSnaps. I think that's an amazing invention. Whoever created it was a genius. So you can have different sizes of QSnaps. So I'll show you 3 different sizes, and then I might do a little insert clip later at the end of the video for a very big QSnap that I've got as well. So this QSnap here is 11 by 11 inch. This QSnap is 8 by 8 inch. And this QSnap is 6 by 6. So they sort of stack. So as promised, this is the QSnap 11 by 17. So I use it for full coverage pieces when I reach quite a lot of stitching. It gives me quite a bit of free space to work with, so my stitches aren't squished. I do like using that. Now, what I tried to do, and this is a good example, I tried to have a little piece of fabric or a ribbon or felt. So what you would do, you would take all of the snaps off. Okay, so it leaves you a smooth edge. You put the fabric over this, then a little piece of material on top of your fabric, on top of your stitching, and your snap. Okay, so this felt or ribbon or whatever will protect your stitches, and as a good example, I have this. Okay, all I have is satin ribbon, red satin ribbon here, again just to protect my fabric and to protect my stitching. You can have a very big QSnap, which I do have. It's 11 by 17 inch, and I use that for full coverage pieces once they get to a big size, once I've stitched a lot. But my favorite size is 8 by 8, which is this one. I just think it's the most portable, it's easiest to hold, it's oh, excuse me, I just think it's the most convenient. but I will use the big 11 by 17 once I've stitched a lot, and if I need to jump from page to page while I'm stitching, or I'm doing beading and I can't obviously put QSnaps on beading and I need big space to work with, I will use the bigger one. You can also use scroll frames, and I will be honest, I've not used them before. I do want to have some, mainly to protect my stitching. With scroll frames, you don't have the snaps like here. All you have is 2 rods here, little rods on the sides, and then you tighten the sides and you roll your fabric onto here. Okay, so it's good for beading because you can just keep rolling your fabric if it's big. A lot of people do big coverage pieces like mirabilias because they've got beading, so scroll frames are good for that. But I don't have any. I didn't have a need just yet, but it's something you could look into, but they're normally quite expensive and this is the cheapest option. There are different brands for QSnaps, and I'll again put some links down below so you could purchase what I've got. So that's in terms of QSnaps. Again, I need to have a look at my iPad, what's coming up next. So now you've sorted your fabric, your floss, you've got your QSnaps, you would probably need to consider your needles. Now there are different sizes of needles, and it all depends on the fabric count you've chosen. I'll insert a photo here showing you which size needles you need for different sizes of fabric. And just to kind of as a guide, for me, my favorite brand is John James needles. I tried to buy gold-plated ones just because they last longer, they don't rub off too quickly, but you can just use simple silver ones. So that's that, but I'll insert the photo again with the sizes so you can see what you need and go through all of that. I do go through quite a lot of needles. For me, they kind of rub off and become really dark and like really difficult to work with to get through the fabric very quickly. So I'll go through a lot of needles, and again, I'll put links down below. Next thing I want to go through with you is how can you hold the fabric. So once you have your fabric on the QSnaps like here, you will end up with a lot of extra fabric on the sides. Now for me, you can see I use these clips here, and these clips are actually spool holders. They and I'll put the link, I got them from Amazon, but they hold spools of thread together so it doesn't unwind, but I find that it works really well holding the extra fabric for me. Now of course, if it's super massive full coverage piece, you will need a lot to hold it in place, but what I additionally use is just some hair clips, and that works pretty well. So just a good tip really if you've got any laying around your house. Right, so what have we got next? Next thing to consider would be having a stand to hold your QSnap or hoop or scroll frame. Personally, I have a Lowry stand, which I'll insert a quick clip here. And then the second option is my Lowry stand over here, which is adjustable. This bit flips over so I can do the knots if I need to. I have my big rig set up over here, so I've got iPad holder, I've got my light, my magnifying glass, you know, I've got the extension as well, and I've got the extra long L-bar here. So this is something that's permanently set up and it's very easy to use. I always have my big projects on this, just because it's easier and it holds everything quite tight. And I also have a tabletop sort of seat stand because I like to have two going at the same time, so I wouldn't have to take QSnaps out of one. If I want to work on two projects in one day, I don't need to take everything out off and put a new one on, so I have two different ones. So this is one of the stands that I do use. It's wooden, it's adjustable, and I've just put my QSnap in it. This is for a smaller project. I only put 8x8 QSnaps in it. It's very easy to use. You can put it on the table, or you can, it's like you sit on it basically, put your legs around it, and it's very easy to stitch. I like having this as an alternative, a second option for myself, so I have two projects ready to go. I don't need to take them off and on of the stand. Handy to have that. It's not a necessity. I stitch with two hands, so for me I need to have it propped so I have the space underneath. But if you stitch with one hand, it won't be a problem. You don't need to have a stand. You can just hold it in hand like this and just stitch as you go along with one hand. But for me personally, I find that if I'm doing it two-handed, it's quicker, it's faster, and that's what you want for full coverage pieces. Okay, next step is to figure it out if you're going to do full cross or tent stitch. So again, I'll show you these same two pieces. Full cross, of course, you know exactly what I have in mind. These are the full crosses. Or you could have 10 stitches, which is just a fancy name for half a stitch. So this is my project where I'm using half stitches, 10 stitches, call it whatever you like. Here we are. With 10 stitches, everything is faster, so it takes half the time it would take with full cross. What I tend to do, if I kit up a piece myself, so if it's Heaven and Earth designs, Tilt and Crafts, Charting Creations, anything like that, I will do a 10 stitch because the pieces are so big, and I want, you know, I don't want it to take me 50 years to do, so I will do a 10 stitch. It's just quicker, which is literally just half a cross, just one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke. Full cross is a cross, 10 stitch is just this. So I do that. Now if it's a kit that I bought, I will always do a full cross like this. It's just my preference. Normally kits are smaller than Heaven and Earth designs and things like that, so I don't mind that. So it's something you need to think about, how quickly you want to stitch, how fast you want to stitch. I know there's a lot of debate going whether that's cheating doing 10 stitch. It's not cheating, it's just a different type of a stitch. It just got different pros and cons in comparison to full cross. I do like doing 10 stitch. I find that my work flows so much faster and I get much more done, especially those big massive pieces. I want to get them done and enjoy them in my lifetime. I don't want to finish them, you know, at my deathbed. So that's just my preference, but it's up to you what you decide to do. Okay, I hope you can see this well enough. So I did a little drawing. I know it's not the best drawing, but it will give you an idea. So that's 10 by 10 stitches. Okay, and what I'm going to show you is what do we mean when we say over 2 over 1. So if you were stitching over 1, if you were stitching over 2, let's start with over 2. Okay, what would happen? This would be your X. So this is stitching over 2. That means you've got 1, 2, 3 corners. 1, 2, 3. So you're stitching to the middle and here. Okay. So you're stitching over 2 threads of fabric. So that's stitching over 2. If you're stitching over 1, you're stitch will be much smaller. So that means stitching over 1. And you can definitely tell the difference in the little drawing. Okay. Now this is the full cross over 2. And a 10 stitch over 2 would look like this. That's a 10 stitch. So you would have, let's say, 3 in a row. Now it does mean that you need to play with how many threads you're using, because obviously with the full cross, coverage will be better. You might be using 2 threads and the coverage will be great, but with 2 threads with 10 stitch, there might be too many gaps in between and you might still see the fabric, so you might want to use 3 threads instead. So you just need to play with that. Now 10 stitch over 1 would look like this. So this would be 10 stitch over 1. So the difference is quite obvious, but if you're doing over 2, you would need to use more threads to make the full coverage actually really good coverage. If you're doing over 1, you won't need to use as much thread, so you're saving up on the thread, and you will need to use less strands every single time. So that's really the main difference. So it explains what we mean when we say over 2. So what we normally say is, let's say 2 over 2. So 2, the first 2 mean 2 threads of floss. Over 2 means over 2 threads of fabric. Okay. That's something you need to consider before you actually start doing it. Next thing you would want to consider is how many threads will you be stitching with. So this is trial and error. I would recommend just cutting a scrap piece of your fabric and trying different variations. So try it with 2 threads, try it with 3, try it with 1, and do like a little square, and then you can see whether that covers the fabric enough for you, if you like the coverage, or you can still see white fabric peeping through. Personally, if it's 18 count Ada, I would use 2 threads. So that's 18 count Ada, or 36 count even weave or linen. If it's, and this is full cross, so full cross I do 2 threads. If it's 10 stitch on 25 count, so stitch over 1, and I would use 2 threads, 10 stitch over 1. So when we say over 1, it means we stitch over one little strand of fabric rather than over a couple of different ones. So I'll probably insert a little quick clip here showing you the difference between over 1, over 2, 10 stitch and full cross. So now that you really have everything you need, so you have your pattern, you've decided which pattern to go for, you have decided if you're using a pattern keeper or you're highlighting your paper copy, you have decided on the fabric you're using, Ada even weave or linen, you have decided which count you're using, you have decided how you're storing your floss, you have sorted your floss, you have the clips to hold your fabric, you have everything tight on a QSnap or on a stand. Next thing is to decide how you're going to stitch everything. So there are different ways of stitching a full coverage piece. Now I won't go too much into detail because this video would be probably 5 hours long, but there are different ways of how you can do it. So this example that I have shown you quite a few times during this video here, I'm stitching it with parking, block by block. What that means is that I stitch one square at a time, and then once I've used that colour in that square, I'll move that thread to the next square. If there's no symbol in that square, I'll just move to the next one. If it's in that one, I'll just pull it through there. That means you do end up with all of these threads hanging. Okay, so I do one block at a time, and then I just move that next thread to the next block, within the row. There are different ways how you can do it. You can do it within the row, within the column, diagonally. There's different options, but at this point you just need to consider how you want to do it, whether you want to park or not. With parking, the only thing is it does get a little bit messy, to me at least, because you're left with all of these hanging threads, but it's the most accurate way of stitching. So maybe if this is your first time stitching a full coverage piece and you don't want to get too overwhelmed, this will be the most accurate way of doing it, to make sure that everything is correct and you're not making too many mistakes. Now, that being said, if you make a couple of mistakes in your full coverage piece, especially in big pieces like Heaven and Earth designs, it won't matter. You won't see a couple of stitches within that massive huge piece, so it's not the end of the world. But of course you don't want to make too many where it becomes obvious, so this could be a good option, parking when you're starting. The next way, you could do cross country. Now, cross-country stitching means you pick one colour and you stitch that one colour, let's say, within one pattern page. So like here, I picked brown and I just stitched all of the brown in the page. Once I had no more symbols of that colour left in the page, I picked another floss, another symbol, and started stitching that. So you could do that page by page. So one colour, pick, let's say, black, and stitch only black in that one pattern page. Or you could do extreme cross country. That means you pick, again, one colour, let's say black, 310. And what you would do, with extreme cross country, you would use every single page within the design piece. So it could be 60 pages, and you just do black in every single page. Then pick second colour, do second colour within the entire piece. So rather than going page by page, you do the whole thing. For me, I prefer doing page by page cross country because I see more progress and I can see a picture revealing. But if I do it extreme cross country over the entire cross stitch piece, it's very hard to see the picture showing up, and I love that about cross stitching. When you start seeing faces, you start seeing little details. So that's a different way of doing it. So it's, again, up to you. How I figured it out, I just gave it a go, and right now I'm enjoying page by page cross country, but block by block. I did do that at the beginning years ago because it, as I say, it was the most accurate and made sure that I'm not missing any stitches, anything like that, and I was too panicked about it. But now that I have Pattern Keeper, I use the app, I find it's easier doing colour by colour. That is just my personal opinion, but the world is your oyster, as I mentioned before, and you can pick anything you want to do. But these are just kind of some of my advices. What have we got next? Okay, so once you have all of that sorted, you can always go deeper and research things deeper. So you can go into doing pin stitches. Again, I don't have videos on it yet. I don't do it myself. It's where you don't tie a knot at the end of your thread when you start working with it, but you just have a pin stitch. That way you're making sure that your stitching isn't too bulky at the back, so you don't have too many knots at the back. I don't do that yet, but you can do that. You can only do that with if you need 2 threads over one, or 4 over one, I believe. I don't do that. I do waist knots, which means to finish off the thread. So once I'm finished working with it, I don't do a knot at the back. What I do, I just So I finished with that floss. I will fed it through anywhere in the piece. Let's say I finished here, I would fed it through. Let's say I finished in this square. Let's move this. Let's say I finished somewhere here. That was my last stitch with that thread in that page. And then I would head it through somewhere here, get it out, and snap it. So this is what it would look like. These are waist knots. That means I don't have to flip my piece, do a knot here, flip it back over. I don't need to do that. I have waist knots here. And then what happens is once you stitch this bit here, this thread, loose thread, will be stitched over at the back, so then you can just snap it with some scissors. That's how I do it. It just less time consuming, makes it much quicker and much easier. But that is it really in a nutshell. I didn't want this video to be too long, so just kind of going through everything all at once, but I might do more detailed videos in terms of comparing different fabrics, you know, comparing different stitches, things like that. You can always leave me your request down in the comment section. I'll also leave all the links to the stuff in the description box, so you can go and find everything very easily. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this will help you to get started with your full coverage pieces, because it's so exciting stitching something and seeing the picture reveal in front of your eyes. It's one of the most pleasurable moments in stitching. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you liked it, please press subscribe, press a bell button to be notified about my videos. Press thumbs up. This helps people to find my videos if they don't know about my channel just yet. And leave comments down below. I love talking to you in the comments. I always say this. This is what I enjoy the most, talking to you. So leave your comments down below. We can discuss anything, and I will see you next time. Bye.